we are here deep in the heart of the East Village. It is Horror Happens Radio, and this is a first ever for me in 245 episodes and over 1,100 guests in 5+ years to actually be faced. Exactly. Talk about insanity. Doing the same thing over, hoping for a different result. It's the first time that we've had faces like this in front of a microphone like that instead of a little microphone on top of the recorder like normal. So this is kind of nice, kind of chill, kind of cool.
And let's face it, we're faces for radio.
We all are. I say that all the time, Glenn. I'm just going to go straight to it because of the way that this will be cut. We have Larry Fessenden, we have Glenn McQuaid here talking the new season of Tales from Beyond the Pale, Season 4, which is funny because talking to people like Clay and talking to Graham and talking to April, it stepped back in time for a modern time with these episodes. Episodes from the Stanley Film Festival at the Park Theater, 2014, and then later on 2015, and also Spectre Fest out in Los Angeles in 2014, and then 2015 at Fantasia. So, gentlemen, first of all, I want to say welcome. I appreciate the time. Again, you guys have been on here. Larry, you and your son by yourself, and also with Glenn. And Glenn, it is a pleasure again to have you back on. And,
good to be here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. When we look at this here, first of all, Season 4, what's the thoughts about bringing alternating studio and live shows, and why Season 4 going on, as Clay put it, the road show?
Well, I'll just jump in.
Go ahead.
You know, the way Tales began is Glenn and I thought, well, wouldn't this be an amazing thing for Glass Eye to do an anthology show for radio? And so we did our first season in the studio with a lot of great talent, and we really had, I think, a fantastic time. And then the opportunity arose shortly thereafter to do a season of live Tales at Dickinson Place, a small theater in downtown Manhattan.
2000.
Yes, well, you're better at dates than me, buddy. That's why we have you here. So, and that was lovely. But I think after that, we sort of responded by saying, let's get back in the studio. So Season 3, we carefully crafted in the studio, and that's another series of great tales and great collaborations. We recorded in studios in LA and in New York. But all the while, after those live shows at Dickinson Place, we started getting invitations to go out to film festivals and present the shows live. So the word got out that we would do these one-time only events in a theater, and it seemed the right place to do it in a horror festival. So we accumulated 10 of them over a couple of years, and it made sense for Season 4, after our Season 3 was in the studio, to do sort of a recount of our days on the road. So that's what brings us here.
Coming from film, when Larry and I decided to do radio, it was a real thrill and a real challenge to even just do that in the studio with the comfort of takes and the comfort of sort of a more traditionally structured process of pre-production and post. Then when it came to doing Season 2, I think we kind of were delighted and that we were pushing ourselves. You know, how do we make it different from Season 1? Because there was this whole big learning curve that we were enjoying, and we thought, well, fuck it, let's make live audio drama. Season 2, I think, was quite successful in that we walked away from it still loving the format and feeling like we had done something special. It was wonderful to go back to the studio for Season 3, simply because, again, you've got the luxury of really taking your time with your actors. It's not sort of an all or nothing event, very, very cozy. But then when we thought, okay, having these invites to go to these horror festivals just seemed like an even madder idea for us to be performing them almost on the road, as it were, as opposed to even in the safety of downtown Manhattan. So
Right.
it's all been a sort of a dare, let's just keep pushing ourselves and see where it goes. Having said that, I'll be very excited to get back to the studio for another season. But the live stuff, it's just a different beast. It's so much fun. It reminds me of the theater. It also reminds me of being in a band when I was a teenager, because everyone's just up on that stage. Sometimes I feel like there's 17 of us. We have Foley artists, musicians, actors, the directors, writers, everyone up on stage, and it's one take. There's just something really thrilling and insane about that process. Also, given the fact that on these most of the shows in season 4, we didn't really get a lot of rehearsal time. I mean, it was a day before maybe that we got our actors in and went through it. Format of the audio drama has been speaking to us in new ways as we continue to chug along with the project.
Good, man.
All right. So you talked about Dickinson Place, and Dickinson Place was, as people like to say, a laboratory. I like to say a petri dish. Mm-hmm. It really was for you guys finding your footing for a live broadcast. And it's funny because listening to a lot of radio theater over the years, listening to baseball, as we've talked about before, and then Glenn, you talking about the aspect of live music, you really only get one take to be able to do it. If you mess up, it's there forever. When I do the radio program, it's there forever when I was doing the live shows. And that was always an interesting aspect that people would have to deal with and what I would have to deal with. But Dickinson Place, talk about that experience and what made you think that after Dickinson Place, you wanted to continue doing the live shows.
Well, one thing I loved about Dickinson Place was quite literally the environment. It was a very cozy theater. And I believe, Glenn will correct me, but I believe the setup was we were able to go in there the day of.
Right.
And we could rehearse in the afternoon, and then and we do the show at night. So we had a full run through, and we did record it. And I think on a rare occasion we would use a line reading from there. So forgive us for cheating, but we had in essence
there was rules.
Yeah, in essence we had 2 takes.
I will correct you though.
What is it?
We never once
used
the readings, and I think the reading, it was something weird. Like the performance was on a Thursday, but we got a reading together in my place on a Tuesday, and so we sort of, that was our week.
But we did
and we were writing right up until the show as well, tweaking and changing.
But I mean, as far as like a dream gig for Tales, it would be to have a regular theater, So we had that early on, in essence, the second season, just this idea of a place to call home. We'd go there. It was a great environment.
I mean,
Larry really took over,
Larry and I often joke we'll find an old rundown theater upstate, and do it up and sort of live above it, become a couple
hermits. Exactly. Well, that's a whole nother. That's the TV show.
No, but there was something very special, especially having been on the road for season 4. There was something special about just having to hop on the subway for a couple of stops and just actually not too long ago. Well, God, maybe 18 years ago. Now, last year we did a show up in Lincoln Center.
Right.
And again, it was nice to just do it all locally. I also love our local talent here as well. We've got some great people that we bring in, like Matt Huffman and John Sparadakis, and James LeGros at the time was a New Yorker as well. So it was just a really close-knit group that I love working with when we do it locally. So,
and it's nice when Vincent D'Onofrio is a local, and you can call him. We had a
Joe loves you for that.
Yeah,
Maggio loves you for
true.
That.
I had a tenuous connection to Vince, and I called him or emailed him, whatever it was, and just said, would you consider this? And he was just such a great spirit about it, and he came down, he did an interview with us, and he was great in the show, and then it became sort of a tradition. He was always in Joe Maggio's pieces, and they've enjoyed that collaboration, and he shows up season after season. So a lot of fruits were born from our New York local, our local people. Although we went to LA and we know a lot of folks out there like AJ and
AJ Bone,
Pat Healy,
Lance Reddick, Kate Flannery.
Talk about versatile with Lance, and we'll get to that later on.
Yeah,
how he can go from Conviction to the Vampire Party.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
One of our favorite terms.
It blew me away, and that was a stressful night because not everything was going quite according to plan. But Lance was on it. I have to say though, getting back to your question of why season 2 led to wanting to, or why that was such a good experience. A lot of it is to do with the talent that we approached. I mean, I think if any actor that we've asked about this, if they're available, they're into doing it. It's just such an unusual format for an actor to sink their teeth into as well, So working with people like Michael Cerverus, Larry, obviously, and
Sean Young
even, and getting them into the whole idea of using their voice only and for the Foley artist to be their physical performance. There's something really invigorating to when all of that is taking place for one take, and it's kind of mostly all got to go right, but if shit happens, it happens,
And hopefully it plays into the aspect that it's a blessing.
But sometimes it doesn't even do that, and you talk to people after the show, and they're like, "Oh, I love that bit," when the gun sound design didn't work, so I'm down on my knees throwing a pot on the floor. I think
a little PTSD for.
I have no doubt.
I think one thing we like to do at the live shows as well is to have it almost be like we're pulling back the curtain on just producing an audio drama. So, if it's my own piece, I like wandering around on stage in my socks, just scribbling or whispering in here or there, and just to remind people they can close their eyes and experience the final product, or open them and see us making it.
We had a lot of fun with that at Dickinson Place in particular. We would bring in like a director like Jeff Bueller, or certainly our local directors, and we'd really encourage them to move around and conduct, if you will, during the live show. And I think they had fun, and it was something to watch, because the missive when we're actually putting on the show is that the actor work with their microphone, not with the other actors. So you're not watching a performance in the way of theater where everyone's eyes are locked. On the contrary, you're looking at your script and your microphone, and it really is an audio experience. And then for the audience to be able to sort of watch the director nervously pacing and going up to the musicians and going, "Okay, let's do it," and going to the Foley and going, "Give me more." It's all part of the carnival of the whole thing.
Someone after our last show, which was at the Overlook Film Festival in Oregon, someone came up to me after and said, "You seem quite intense."
Fair.
But I like that. I like that aspect of it, that you close your eyes and you get the art, or open it and you just see the process, and the two don't have to gel completely. I like that.
For you guys, and I know I've talked about this before, especially to you, Larry, where my origins of being interested in radio comes from. My grandfather, the nights when the Yankees are playing, listening to baseball. And also, you look at the variety of radio dramas that have been out there, everything from Orson Welles all the way through to more of the modern day ones that you hear. And it all impacts you differently. And that's one of the great things I've said to not only the variety of people we've spoken to for this episode, but it's the connection aspect. Different people, different connections. It's subjective almost in the way you interpret it. But for you two, where does it go back to with radio dramas? I mean, it was brought up, and I want to say it was Clay who brought up the Mercury Theater. Maybe it was Graham who brought up the Mercury Theater. You guys were influenced by the Mercury Theater in Orson Welles. Is there a connection with that, or is it something different that you guys, growing up, really entranced you, immersed you, and seduced you to do this?
Well, I'll start. When I was a kid, I grew up in the 70s, and I loved movies.
Right.
And as well as horror movies, I also liked like James Cagney and certain kind of Warner Brothers, the gangster pictures. And there was no video, there was no YouTube, there was no VHS.
Right.
And so my impulse was to relive these movies on my own time. And so I would record them on cassette. At night, you know, they'd play at 2 a.m. There'd be some weird Cagney movie, and I'd record it, and then I'd listen to it because I built models and drew drawings and so on. And I would listen to the cassettes over and over, Casablanca and what have you. So I just developed this sense of how important sound was, and I loved the rhythm of a line of dialogue, and then the clip-clop of the feet down the hallway, and then some other music cue. And so it's funny, it wasn't even radio, it was just the power of audio in our storytelling. And there's a number of movies that I know well just as audio pieces, even to the point, this is how old I am and how recent the modern technology is. I recorded Jaws in the theater, and I took the recorder in and I pushed record, and it was the most, I felt like I was breaking the law, and I'd be carted off and thrown into jail. Well, I had this intuition. And then I listened to that, and you know, this is my intimate knowledge of the Jaws script, but every sound effect that Spielberg chose. I just love the audio aspect of entertainment. And then, you know, I live in New York. You could find old radio plays. I remember this Alfred Hitchcock record that was very special, and you drop the needle and he comes on and he presents, and that's so fascinating. And then there was the very little short vignettes. So what I found, and I'll wrap up, but I just feel that most people have some memory of listening to a kid's album or something that was on the radio. I was also, having said all of this, listening to, quote, old-timey radio. You know, once again, it had to do with what my favorite activity was, building a model or building a little set or creating something or drawing. And so audio was the perfect way to engage all the senses.
And you have a large model set now to work with Glass Eye, and what you do.
I still
tails
do.
With
All that shit.
Look at that.
Built all that shit.
You know, and the fascination with the Wendigo.
Yes.
Glenn, what about you?
Let me see. I would say the influence to really get in and roll up our sleeves and make audio drama was Inner Sanctum, which is old radio play series, which had I think Peter Lorre, maybe Boris Karloff were in a few, and Larry and I were listening to one in particular, and it was just stunning. It was amazing. And this wife comes back from the dead and is running around an old mansion with a scalpel in her hand, and it's just
bananas, right?
Fantastic.
we were cackling.
Yeah, it was really entertaining, and it was invigorating as a storyteller. The possibilities just seemed sort of endless. So, yeah, those Inner Sanctum was a real influence. Also, just music in general, like the idea as an artist to be able to create something that doesn't necessarily have to involve a lot of money and a whole lot of people to get your stories out through this format has just been really a great way to experiment in my own writing and stuff. I think with the tales that I write now, they're definitely pushing myself to just try new things, and certainly working in a way that I'm enjoying the freedom of knowing whatever I write is actually going to get produced.
That's interesting. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, I can't help jumping in because, you know, I play in a band and we record music, and I'm always like, oh, can we put rain sounds during the bridge? And my friend's always like, "What the fuck? We're making music here." And I'm like, "No, I don't
about the
know.
wolf?
It's the
howling.
wolf sound.
It's gonna
The
sound great at that
creaking
sax.
door." And Tom Waits has used it. Certain musicians enjoy this landscaping, if you will, during we're talking about standard songwriting, but it. And then another thing that I've encountered, this is just to talk about my love of sort of the blend of what audio can do. Another thing is often you'll have a piece of music, let's say it's taking you out of the movie, and I've had people say, well, let's fade down the sound effects because now, the song can take over and the tears will flow. And I'm like, no, this is the only medium in which we can have the sound and the music. I mean, the music's great, it works, but I wanna keep that sound effect. It has a whole other alchemy. So the point is there's so much richness between sound, music, sound effects, and then, dialogue is almost the least interesting part of it, but then one does have a story to tell. But it's just all of that is so rich and exciting.
I think the word alchemy sums it up for
That's a
me.
great word.
I'm working on a couple of pieces, cleaning up the last few shows that we did, and just love working on my own, and I love just getting in and seeing what's there, the Foley, the music, the sound design, and adding little bits and pieces here, and just in heaven doing all of that. There's just something really wonderful about putting it all together, and knowing that you can do it. We can do it. We're fairly scrappy still, but we're getting great content out there. I really believe in our project. I really believe that what we're doing is offering something a little bit different and new as well to fans of the old-time radio stuff. We've done pieces that are we're certainly pushing ourselves on our own little journey as well.
Well, that's interesting because coming over here listening to, for the fourth time, the latest season, it's very hard nowadays, Glenn and Larry, to find a signature in this ocean of content we have. And it's not films, it's not movies, it's not music, it's content that most people create. Very rarely do you find film, movies, or music standing out. When you look at it, you kind of touched on what I was thinking about what is that fingerprint that Tales from Beyond the Pale has in this growing market of podcasts. And I have a friend who probably doesn't live too far from here, I collaborated with on projects before, who's a fan of No Sleep. And No Sleep is an entirely different kind of podcast, but yet it falls under the umbrella of storytelling. And for you two, not only going into a season 4, but just going forward with it, season 5, whatever the plans might be, and we'll hopefully teeter on to that as we move forward. But how do you distinguish yourself? How do you make Tales, beyond the host Fessenden and what he does at the beginning of it, how do you make it stand out?
I don't think that was ever something that we thought too hard about, that we had to make something different,
No.
I felt like from the beginning, when was it, like 2012 or something, when we first got the idea for this?
9?
Maybe,
I don't know.
I'd say 12 was 5, so probably 9.
Sorry,
isn't the whole point that we did
I'll get my PowerPoint out in a
the
second.
famous Stakeland drive was 2009?
So
Okay.
2009.
Cheers, mate.
What was I even saying?
Going back, not distinguishing yourself.
Yeah,
stand out.
I think
We never had a plan.
we didn't have much. Our only plan was, didn't seem to be too many people out there sinking their teeth into audio drama
Right.
at all. Most stuff I was hearing was, 80 years old, and
Right.
thought, well, we could just get into this and see where it takes us. I mean, I felt like we were going to make it contemporary just by it coming from us anyway. I don't think there was ever a real drive to sort of burn down the old school or anything like that at all.
Burn it down.
But I sort of just knew once Larry and I got motoring on season 1 that it was certainly a lot different from anything else that was out there. I didn't know anyone who was making audio drama at that stage. It's definitely a little bit more popular now, but I think the seal that it has in a way comes from Glass Eye Picks, because I feel like Larry has for many years allowed Glass Eye Picks to develop in a sort of a various artists type of way.
Absolutely.
And
it's a garden, as it was brought up last night when I was talking to Clay.
So that was a big part of it was...
Garden, is it too? I can't wait to hear that interview. In fact, can we cut to it now?
You still have the one mosquito in here that
yes,
feeding
the
on me.
mosquito.
At least it's not a bed bug.
Sounds like a play, Glenn.
But anyway,
Look, I think that the agenda was never to sort of self-consciously imitate old-time radio. It was always to really get to the heart of these stories and have each individual artist tribute something. So by definition, I feel like Glass Eye has never been specifically trying to do something. At the same time, I feel strongly about the brand, but the brand is based on the idea of collaboration, meeting smart people, following up with those people that have a like-minded approach to the horror genre. And in a weird way, it's not always horror-centric that excites me, which is why we brought in people like Joe Maggio. You know, this is not a horror director.
Right.
This is only to say that I think a lot of people have sensitivity to the horrors of life. And what I have always wanted to do is sort of curate so that there's a broader tent and there's maybe a literary-minded person who can access their sense of dread, and that becomes someone who will have a voice at Tales. And I think with, all I'm saying is that it's not a deliberate thing where we're trying to cozy up to the genre. We're actually trying to expand the genre, and I think that's where things start getting interesting. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't tell stories of werewolves and vampires and so on.
Right.
But
they're always homosexual werewolves. And actually homosexual
vampires. Now that you mention it,
Tales from Beyond the Pale.
So we're pushing
furthering the gay agenda.
The limits of diversity
since 2009.
So that's actually the brand. Oh my God, it's so brandy.
Wow.
Anyway, the point is, and of course, everyone, my tedious stories about the environmental collapse, which always get an eye roll, no doubt, but I will soldier on. So the point is there's mixed agendas, and none of them are simply to pander to audience expectations. We're not trying to make the greatest horror website you'll ever see, or whatever I'm saying, the greatest horror podcast. We really want to celebrate diversity, the individual voices in the genre, and yeah. So
it's been a real thrill.
In other words, we have no mission, and therefore it becomes, I think, interesting.
Well, I think what makes it interesting is when you look back at the entire collection now, and all of these really diverse collaborators and their insane stories, and even like someone like Joe Maggio, his three pieces are all completely different, but his voice is there,
Exactly.
So I love the art of gathering the collection. Although season 4 was less diverse in terms of artists, that was simply because Larry and I were on the road, so convenience. For convenience sake, we wrote and directed a bunch of those, but we also had April Snellings and Clay McLeod Chapman.
Loves you two so much.
April's a smasher. I love her.
She is amazing. She's amazing.
But even in those, and yes, it's true, and we always want to maintain the tradition of reaching into the community and finding fantastic voices, especially, the thrill of working with Stuart Gordon or Ron Perlman.
On the Hound.
Yeah, people who have been around, and Angus Scrimm, rest his soul, and some of the old characters. But the point is I would say even when it's just me and Glenn have to come up with stories, there's a great diversity there because we love all the possibilities in the genre.
I think we went opposite directions for the LA show.
That was so fun.
Yeah.
People thought that Glenn's tale was mine because it was sort of it was a bit of a diatribe about, the war. And then mine was just a free-for-all. How
Literally,
can we describe it?
How would you describe it?
Is it all biographical, Larry? The Vampire Party?
Oh, 100%.
I have no doubt.
Yeah, that really happened when I went to L.A. With my very straight, lovely friend who was
that?
Mike Ellenbogen. He used to work at Glass Eye, and he basically helped me distribute Habit, and we were doing lots of fun things to promote the film, like calling up vampire societies and trying to, and we actually had great success. And he landed this sort of cocktail event at the Vampire Society, and we got really excited, and we were going to have a major critic there. Actually, the guy who wrote one of my favorite books, The Monster Party, called David Scull, who anybody with the internet can look up. He's a fantastic commentator. He's on a lot of the Universal movies. He's the voice of analyzing the great films. Anyway, so it was a great evening, but it really was. It's a very eccentric group of dudes with their little cocktails, and they had the poster which features my ass on it.
I was going to say.
So literally, it's down to the.
Did they have the bathroom filled with the pictures? Wow.
And Mike went in.
Wow.
He got stoned. He went in, and he said he started to freak out there. So it's really a tribute to a great night that I'll never forget. And I have to tell you this, and so we performed in L.A., and after the show, I went backstage, and who showed up but David Delval, the very host that, and he obviously must have watched this and just started chuckling inside because he must have known this is...
He chuckled inside.
Yeah.
Not outside.
Well, I hope he chuckled outside, too. Anyway, we had an amazing reunion after, 30 years, and there he was. Now, isn't that amazing that he decided to go? No! He hadn't. And there you have it. So it was great fun. That was one of the many things that happens at Tales from Beyond the Pale.
Beyond the Pale. You know what? This is something I had brought up before and had been talked about with Graham, with basically everyone. And it's a very tight inner circle. Sound, Foley, cast. It's not people who are inexperienced. Simon Rumley talked about how when he recorded his episode, he had issues because of the fact that the people that were casted were not voice actors. And this was a challenge for him. And with that being said, a lot of the regulars are people that you've worked with over the years in one form or another. Is it the aspect of trust, or is it the aspect of not wanting someone with inexperience? Where does it fall when you bring in cast and crew for Tales episodes, especially live ones where it's one take?
Money?
Money, fair enough. It's morbid. But even money though. I mean, you could sit here right now and say, "I'll give you $1 million to direct a movie," and I have no experience. Are you going to take that chance?
Yeah, right.
No. Go ahead.
I think there's a comfort. There's just a natural comfort in working with friends, and there's a shortcut there to connect between artists.
Right.
So. It wasn't anything that we set out to decide. Let's always, whenever we can, get John Spiridakis in. I just love the guy. He's
amazing,
tight friend, and
he loves the art form.
Right.
He's a great reader. He knows every Poe. I mean, he's a madman, and it's. He really is. He's very special.
He's a real character. He's a very special guy.
You learn from him every time you hang out with him.
So
maybe things you didn't want to know.
and the Matt Huffmans and even going back to season 1, these were all people. A lot of them were people that we'd worked with before in the film world. So I think it's just reaching out to friends. We don't use a casting agent. for Tales. We have done casting calls for.
Was it Los Angeles? Because Daniel had brought it up that he had made some suggestions.
No, Daniel Noah really took care of us for LA. We got most of the people through him. People like Martin Starr and Lance Reddick,
right.
Kate Flannery role. People that had worked with him.
Cooper Roth,
wonderful actor who was in. Spectrefest,
right?
Cooties,
right? He's the villain. Daniel was saying.
Actually, we did casting for J.T. Petty. We cast his piece Johnny Boy, right? We did a casting call for that. But other than that, it's really, to be honest with you, I find it a little bit of a pain in the ass placing the ads and spending a day
Makes sense.
auditioning and stuff. When we know so many people that are really into what we're doing, it's been a lot of fun. That has been a challenge, certainly with the live shows that we do on the road that we don't necessarily know the people. For instance, in the most recent show at the Overlook, there's quite a few sort of local talent people that we used there that we hadn't used before. Thankfully, everything went off without a hitch, but it's always a little nerve-wracking being up there and hoping people get the gist and get the fact that once we're all up there,
right,
it's kind of more like you're in a punk band now, let's go for it, So.
Well, that's the thing with music, and Glenn, I'm glad you brought up music before, Larry, before you met. For me, booking a band, I booked a rockabilly jump blues band for 3 years, and we played everywhere from Coney Island all the way through Vegas. And when the lead singer had to get a sub, whether it's on sax, whether it's a guitar player, whether it's a drummer, whatever it might be, they've got to know their stuff, and you're not going to just go to Joe Schmo off the road. You're going to go with people who, you're talking to your peers, your friends about, because they have to understand that, if you can't hit this particular note, or you can't do this opening, or you can't, do a solo that's used to for a song like King Kong or New Orleans or something like that, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's why I say trust your inexperience, because I guess it's a mixture of both. Then
I think there's luck.
I think luck's great. Absolutely,
a lot of luck as well. When you're doing it, shit just happens. For instance, again out in Oregon for the Overlook Festival,
right.
I needed an actress who could do a pretty good Irish accent, and we're going out there. How's this going to happen? And then Landon Zakim, who runs the festival, recommended an actress whose mother turned out to be from Kerry, and could put on a wicked Kerry accent. So it's a lot of fun when things like that happen, I think for the live ones now, and certainly the ones that we go on the road, I'm guilty of sort of casting less people and having less sort of locations, and that just like doing them a little bit, honing in on the simplicity of a domestic scene that goes wrong,
Yeah, and didn't I benefit when Barbara dropped out?
Oh, that's right.
That worked for me.
For Reappraisal, which was the last thing I wrote and directed, it was to be featuring the voice talents of Barbara Crampton, but she couldn't quite do it.
Right.
And her character was basically a grand, very playful, but quite evil demon.
Right.
And as soon as she dropped out, I was like, Larry!
I just happened to be available. Fancy that.
So Reappraisal, for the most part, features Larry Fessenden
as Barbara Crampton,
as an old demon,
and
Climate Cloud Chapman, just in this weird conversation that starts to drift beyond the pale. I'm looking forward to getting that one out, the last batch out as well.
That's fascinating because you bring up another character, Larry, that you embody. I want to ask you, and then Glenn, I want you to follow up with this. What inspired you to be the host of Tales? What was it? Was it just convenience? There was no one else to do it? Or was it the aspect? Because every year I'm starting to believe more and more, not only the fact that you take on different incarnations of that character Fessenden, but Glenn, you're the shape, without a doubt. You've escaped your Philly form.
That's so sweet.
You're most welcome. But in all seriousness, why go with you as the host? Because not only that, you take on a lot of other roles. I think I wrote down on the pad I have with me, you must have at least a dozen roles, maybe 13 roles, over the 4 seasons and 7 in season 4. So you really are just involved in every aspect of it, from gangsters to soldiers to Jesus H. Christ. Great laughs, by the way. I'm glad you kept the laughs when Jesus H. Christ showed up.
That's another conversation. But,
well, I think when we decided to do this, I think we both like the format of the host.
Right.
It's certainly traditional in a lot of anthology stuff, both movies and radio. I don't know if Glenn even had a choice. I just think, look, our default is like, let's use what we got. Let's use the guy that'll show up. Oh, fancy that. I'm here. And, look, I love acting, and I'm very lucky that Glenn has always been a fan of my work. He's cast me in stuff when it was not a given. Not least of which, of course, is I Sell the Dead. But even in his own radio plays, he'll say, I have this in mind. And I'm always tickled. I'm an actor.
Barbara can't make it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't mind being second fiddle. But, the fact is that I still have the actor's ego, and you're just sitting there waiting for the phone to ring. Right. So it means a lot to me. And then Glenn is good. We have all kinds of relationships, because we're producing each other and we're doing this and that. But the one that is sort of, I think, our easiest place is when he's directing me, because he's firm, he knows what he wants, and I'm very submissive. Whereas if we're producing together, I'm going to have an attitude and this and that and this and that. But I think it's true, right?
It's very nice of you to say that. Yeah. I think in the early days, it was absolutely just a given. Larry's an actor. I'm not an actor. Right. It started off with Larry and I, and for a while it was just Larry and I in the pub, fucking around with this idea. How's this going to work in Jonathan Swift's? It was just sort of a given. Let's start this off just with ourselves. I think one of the first things we did was play around with the opening credits, which were always, perhaps you're up in a mountain and an avalanche happens, or you're off out at sea and a sea monster gets you. I remember just having a bit of fun with you coming up with all these bizarre ways that we could, suggest to the listener that they are no longer where they are. So I think the host stuff sort of grew out of that. But without a doubt, I mean, there was always going to be a host, and I feel like when the idea came, it was just like, why wouldn't it be Larry?
I love I love thinking about the opening, because I think people who like tales are very familiar with that, maybe you're sitting in your favorite chair. Exactly. And, the classic thing, it was just jotted down on a piece of paper when we were trying to figure out how to introduce these.
Guinness.
Guinness.
Special ingredient.
I also we had this trope that in the first season that the packages were arriving in the mail and that the host is opening them. And that's really how it was, because at least one or two of the tales were just sent to us. As we've said, Simon Rumley produced his in the UK, and we got it in the mail. So
we got
a lot of the beginning of a lot of the conceit, how the host came about, was sort of just those little snippets. And you look back and you go, this is kind of great. This works.
I remember you being most enthusiastic about opening up the parcels.
It's like Christmas.
Yeah. That was what was driving you for quite a while. It was just like, that could be this kind of box, or this, or an old cellophane.
Or the dead fish.
Yeah, exactly. That was Glenn's idea, but that's the point. We started riffing on it. It really created a little Teddy. I mean, I still like the first season's host. It's funny. You're right. They do shift. And then season 3, we had this idea of season 2. He's a little because we're live, so he's a little all over the shop. But then season 3, we had this idea that we had to keep up with the binge culture. So we said, let's have an actual storyline in the host. And that led to this idea of the shape, and kind of we had a new setting, which is the lighthouse. Lighthouse. Yeah. So it's kind of, I was always embarrassed by it, but it seems to work.
I love it. You were, even when we were finished, we'd finished season 3, you were walking out there like, I don't know about that.
I do want to say, I love the shape, and I love the sweetness, and the way we managed to make it tie in with each piece, and then it was the sad story of the loneliness and the shape. I mean, I advocate everything, but I was like, is anyone going to follow this? You know,
Am I the shape? Was that me?
I really believe that.
Oh,
you
you
are.
mean probably?
Is that me?
Whenever we have a monster, we cast Glenn.
And I
He's
jump at the
the,
opportunity. I don't get
probably wear this
many
shape.
offers, but if there's a Bigfoot
And he was
or
also the Bigfoot,
creature, any
fantastic
kind of
work.
creature.
Man, you kicked his ass in food chain, man. That was fucking
I was
great.
something going on that day, and I remember I was just
Oh, yeah.
I was making him mournful as opposed to kind of like rawr, scary. I was just like,
It's fantastic. That was a tough one. Speaking of Glenn and I, as I say, we have our working relationship. It's not always pretty. I don't know if it's up to the level of
Brilliance never
Betty
is.
Davis and
Feud.
and what's her name?
Feud too.
But with that one, and I think also Glenn was very protective of April's work, which is just a fantastic script. We loved it. We had a great recording session with Jeremy and Sean Young and the lads, and but it was complicated. And I sent Glenn an early cut, and he's going, "Dude, I don't think you got that attack at all." He goes up in the tree and he falls down, and and then I would go back to the drawing board, and we worked on that a lot, and then he supplied some stuff, and so some of them are really ambitious in terms of sculpting. I mean, that may be one of the most ambitious ones, where you're trying to say, now this creature pulls someone up into a tree, tears off their leg, drops them down, and then the guy hops away.
Tears off the right leg.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're dealing with it's a big environment as well, and there's subtlety going on in that piece as well. I think there were many layers of even the insects and stuff, which were kind of rhythmically out when they needed to be, and so on.
That's another 2-hour conversation alone about the sound design and how detailed it is with it. And that's the hardest thing, talking to Graham Resnick about it, because Graham Resnick is like an encyclopedia.
You could do 2
I
hours
feel like
with Graham.
insect with him talking about things like that. But it's interesting, you talk about April, and season 4, you've got Clay, you've got April. Wait, let me go down my list here, and yes, folks, there are visuals to it. There isn't many more. It's just Clay and April, and that's about it. And Doug Buck as writers and directors.
As writers, yeah.
Now, selection process for season 4, majority, you said, convenes for you two, but having them include, what's the thinking behind it?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, when we did the first Stanley, I'm not sure we realized it was the start of season 4. I think we were probably still wrapping up season 3 even at that stage. So there was no grandmaster plan. I just had a great time working with April Snellings. I love her writing. I love what she brought to Rue Morgue. I think she's just a fabulous writer. And I've read stuff that's not even out there yet, and it's just mind blowing. So I'm honored that she's into hanging out and working with me, and same with Clay McLeod Chapman. So these are people that I've other things going on with also, and have just become good friends. And so when it came time to do new tales, if with the live stuff as well, and if I had other things going on, I'd be like, April, please, can you help me write this one, help me shape this one? Or with something like Cold Reading, which is I went to April with an idea, and I had a way that we could completely break it up, and she could go off and do her piece and I could do mine, and we could then sort of mold it from there, But these are just good friends that I feel we're lucky enough to still be able to work with before they hit it big.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Was that with Douglas Buck though? Also, because you give him credit at the end, Glenn, for no. Let me take it back. You give Mitch Davis credit. Mitch Davis gives Douglas Buck credit, because I reached out to Mitch Davis. Mitch Davis said no. It was Douglas Buck who did all the work on the ground to make sure that happened. So can you talk about having someone like Douglas Buck who's never done something like that, as far as I've researched?
Well, I've known Doug for many years. I think what happened is that I was at Fantasia showing Habit, and Doug's short Cutting Moments, I think, played in front of mine. In any case, we've been dear friends ever since. I've tried to support his habit. I made, me and Ed Pressman produced Doug Buck's version of Sisters.
Okay.
And whatever. So Doug is a comrade, and he's, of course, always aware of what Glass Eye's up to, and he's always said, I'd love to get involved with a tale if that ever would come up. And when we were heading to Fantasia, I do think Mitch invited us, although for all I know, Doug Buck made sure it happened in any case. When we were heading up there, it made only sense to... he's a native up there now.
Would have been rude not to invite him.
Exactly. And it was great because Doug was extremely ambitious. He rode Glenn very hard and made, he made this musical tale, which we've always had live musicians on and off, but they're providing score. And this was actually part of the drama. So it was great. It was a huge challenge. Doug is a very precise and demanding director, and he made us push ourselves because we had a lot of, actors union stuff to deal with. I should mention that Jen Wexler does a great deal of work on these. She's our producer on a couple of the seasons, and so
it was a fun evening.
It was a crazy night. Once we finally got there, and we went. I think we very deliberately scheduled Doug's first because it was epic. It was a freaking hour long. Yeah. Oh, that's the edited version.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
The director's cut.
Yeah, and then we had a lovely, elegant one that Glenn had written with April that had dual language because the idea was to celebrate that we were in Montreal. Yes, exactly. And then mine, because I knew that would be an exhausting evening, I wanted to do just like a punk show.
Right.
So I did a sort of attack the small house in the middle of nowhere kind of Night of the Living Dead tribute.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
But with little teeny dust bunnies. So, it was a great night. And by the end, my whole idea was that I wanted to do not act in mine, but do Foley in mine. So I was there smashing just windows. So it was a real punk wrap up. And the whole thing was in a pub on a rainy night.
The venue was interesting. It was a torrential night. And Yuck Yucks, which is fine pub.
It's small.
It's small. They had a few different back rooms and stuff. I didn't quite suss it out. Reminded me of the gay 90s. But it was fun. We got there and realized pretty quickly that it was going to be a raucous event. But it was a lot of work running up to organizing that, and even getting into the country was posed a little bit of a problem at one stage.
I didn't have my passport. I didn't have my passport. It was 2 days. 2 days to go. And I had just made a feature film, my son's movie, Stray Bullets. And I was sort of resentful of the whole affair because it was coming off production. And then I looked at my passport and it was completely defunct, or whatever the word is, expired. So then I had that 2-day panic. And I mean, I literally called people that I know that work in the city and all this. But actually, to the credit of this city, you can get a passport in like 2 days if you just stand in line and do the work, which is fine. I was happy to do it.
I was so relieved,
but we were all
I really didn't know that you were going to make it.
We were pretty nervous, and I feel like they snagged me at the border anyway. If I was a criminal, they got my number. I'm always snagged at the border.
My dad, whenever he goes through airports, he's just bald, glasses, heavy set Polak, and he sits there and they nail him every time.
That's hilarious.
And he laughs. He goes, they think I'm a terrorist. I don't understand. I'm Polish. I don't understand what a terrorist is. He makes a joke about it, but there's certain people. Every time I go to Montreal or Toronto, not only does my debit card get stolen, but also that they sit there and they ask you the questions. You're like, do I look like someone who's going to do this? I just want to go to the festival. You know. So it's a dance.
It's a tradition that I have with the Canadian government. It's all good.
Well, I hope the next anniversary is less eventful. So.